If you're going to talk professional wrestling, you got to talk Hulk Hogan. This guy carried wrestling for years and then blew it up to superstar international status. He had the look, the long blonde hair. He kind of looked like he could be a villain, like when he played Thunder Lips in Rocky. He had the tan, the size 24-inch pythons, but most importantly, because there were a ton of big dudes in professional wrestling, especially at this time, but he had the mic skills and the charisma to back it all up. And in the 80s, he had some of the greatest, most anticipated matches of all time. You also have to remember that in the 80s, a lot of us still thought that wrestling was kind of real, especially us kids. And that just really added to the fire, and he really sold the fact that it was real. I mean, he'd come in there, and he would do the leg drop. He had a sleeper hold, the big boot to the face. And most importantly for us, I think, he was fighting for America. He fought off the Russians that were our biggest rival at that time, namely Nikolai Volkov. He also fought off the Iron Sheik, and somehow they managed to find dudes that were even bigger than he was, and he fought them off too. Foes like Big John Studd, Andre the Giant, Earthquake, King Kong Bundy, Paul Mr. Wonderful Orndorff, Sergeant Slaughter, Ultimate Warrior. He had some great rivalries with all these guys. He took on all comers and sent them all packing. Of course, his best friendship and eventual rivalry with the Macho Man was probably the peak. It was more than just legendary epic battles. These were wars. And then you enter Miss Elizabeth and the love feud, and how to this day, I still don't know what part of that was real and what's not. I mean, honestly, it all seemed real, and I still think it might have been. I'm not really sure. But I gotta say, for me, his greatest rivalry was, and the thing that launched him into superstar status, I believe, was his rivalry with Roddy Piper. My dad taught me at a young age, you have no great heroes without great villains. And there very possibly may not have been a Hulk Hogan without a Roddy Piper. And Piper was a great villain. He talked the talk, he walked the walk. He was a cheap shot artist, and he pissed people off so bad. Every time he went into the ring, people literally wanted to kill him. I think he's been stabbed like 3 times. He had a gun pulled on him at least once by the fans, and I think once in a locker room. Fans hated him so much. He would make highly inappropriate comments and things about people's appearance and skin tone and just things that he shouldn't have said. And he was busting people's skulls with coconuts. And then, of course, he had the legendary Cowboy Bob Orton as his bodyguard. And this dude always wore a cast, and he hit people in the back of the head with it. And Piper was a former boxer, so he was pretty tough. Even though he wasn't quite the size of Hogan, he seemed like he was going to pull some dirty tricks and some dirty antics and possibly even end up winning this match. It was a must-watch, a must-see for people, and they loved Hogan, and there were people that loved Piper, so everyone had to watch this. And it was the first WrestleMania, and it was an absolute spectacle. They got all kinds of celebrities involved, and Cyndi Lauper was there, and a bunch of, I think Muhammad Ali was there, a bunch of other celebrities as well. But the main thing, the main event, the thing that everyone wanted to see Hogan kick Piper's ass. And for me, the main guy I wanted to see was Piper. I actually ended up interviewing Piper later. I'll put it at the end of the video. And I got to share a moment with him in the parking lot with him and his son Colton. And I told him how when I was younger, my dad passed away, but Piper was always his guy. So every time I would watch Piper, I would think of him. And he teared up and he gave me a big hug and he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "Your dad would be really proud of you." And I'll never forget that moment. It was shortly before Piper passed away, but standing there talking to my dad's hero and his son about me as a son and my father, what a moment. I'll always treasure that. Another classic, absolute legendary wrestler from the 80s was Ric Flair. This guy was the high-flying, limo-riding, wheeling and dealing, kiss-stealing son of a gun. He would snatch your lady in a heartbeat. Aside from his unmatched mic skills, and I mean unmatched, nobody's close, like totally unmatched. No one's even in the same universe as Flair when it comes to mic skills. The other great thing he had was his ability to sell like he looked like he had just been shot in the head with a gun. He would really get into hurting people, and people hated him because of it. But with that platinum blonde hair, when he would get color, meaning when he would get busted open, and he would bleed, the contrast of that bright red blood on that platinum blonde hair just looks so cool, especially in all the magazines. I saw him in the wrestling magazines before I ever saw him on television or saw him live. I think the first time I saw him, he was in WCW, which I believe later became WCCW, which then later went back to WCW. I think, I don't know, this is not a professional wrestling documentary, or I remember what I watched kind of, but I know some of the leagues and the federations changed a couple times, so I get confused when thinking back. But the first time I saw him, I was like, oh yeah, I gotta watch this dude. He would get punched, and then he would just do that stiff leg stumble where he'd stumble around the ring and then end up falling flat on his face. And it was usually right after he did that stupid strut and he did some cheap move or some heel move to some baby face. It was so satisfying to watch him just, boom, fall flat right on his face. He was a 16-time world champion for a reason. He knew the business inside and out, and he was the total package. Other than maybe he wasn't quite as tall as he wanted to be, he was pretty tall. He was 6'1", but he was amongst giants at that time. But he carried himself like a giant, and he could run that mouth, boy. The Fabulous Freebirds. I don't know why I always seem to be attracted to the villains in wrestling, but these dudes are my favorite. Just something you had to look at like a car crash. We had Terry Bam Bam Gordy, who was like the big biker looking enforcer. He was scary. Buddy Roberts, who just looked like the sneaky guy, like he would sneak in your house at night and steal your vases or your candles, your golden candle sconces, and put them in a white pillowcase and then sneak back out the window. Like that kind of guy. And then you had Michael P.S. Hayes with all the peacocking and strutting, just the way he would walk around the ring and tell people to shut up and make fun of people's ladies right in front of him. What a stud. They came into one of the best theme songs of all times. Their walkout song was Bad Street, which I think Michael Hayes actually sung that song. And I'm not sure if the other dudes performed or not, but it was definitely something that Michael Hayes was involved with. And that theme song was classic. And you just love to watch them get beat up. And again, that's the best thing that heels can do, is they can sell, because that's what they're there for. They're there for the fans to root against, and they're there for the fans to root for watching them get pummeled. And these guys could get pummeled like no other, because they were so arrogant and because they were so dirty. So they deserved it. So then you juxtapose these heels, these gutter southern beer drinking, woman stealing, cheap shot taking guys up against the Von Erichs. The Von Erichs, their walkout song, well, let me take it back. So the first time I ever saw the Von Erichs, I saw Kerry. And he was the complete opposite of the Freebirds. And the Freebirds, of course, were their biggest rivals. But I remember the first time I saw Kerry Von Erich, and I was like, this guy is badass. He came into Tom Sawyer by Rush. He had long hair, kind of looked like a metal or a rocker dude. And I was like, oh, this is my guy. At the time when I was watching WCW at like 1 o'clock in the morning, I think I was in 7th grade, and it would come on Friday or Saturday night, and I would stay up all night and watch it. And then I found out he had brothers. So they were a faction, and they were cool, but they were not nearly as cool as Kerry. He was the whole reason I loved that family. And then, of course, later in life, they all went through a tremendous amount of tragedy, which is so sad. And I'm not going to go into it, but I used to love watching them wrestle, especially watching them wrestle the Freebirds. They were some of the most fun weekends that I could have had at 1 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday night as a probably 11-year-old kid. I couldn't tell you exactly why the Macho Man is in my top 3 or 4 wrestlers of all time in one word or even one sentence, or probably not even in just one paragraph, but I'll try. There's so many things to love about this dude. His look was totally a celebration of the 80's. His charisma, you could just tell he was a real tough guy in real life. And his voice was so recognizable, and the things that he said were outlandish and intimidating at the same time. His love story with Elizabeth was the greatest love story of professional wrestling history. And at that time, there weren't too many guys going off the top rope. Jimmy Snuka made it popular, but Mach had a kind of a different flair and different style to it. It just seemed heavier and harder. His walkout song was simple, but his robes and attire were extraordinary. I knew this guy was going to be special, but I didn't realize he would go on to become the icon that he would become. Rest in peace. My absolute favorite wrestler of all time. I was watching horror movies at this time, but I was still kind of also a little bit afraid of him. But I also kind of loved him. If you can remember that period of time in your life where you were scared of something, but you also just couldn't stop watching it or looking at it. So it was the perfect time for me to be introduced to The Undertaker when he made his debut in the WWE. I still remember it. The outfit was total theater. His walkout song, everything about it was perfect. I thought it was totally amazing. And the way he slowly plodded around the ring like a slasher, like Jason or Michael Myers, the way he would sit up again after he was knocked down like Jason or like a zombie or something. He was not only undefeatable, he was also unkillable. You couldn't stop this guy. And at one point, he had a streak of 20-0 going into the only WrestleMania I've ever been to, where he freaking lost. Yeah, the only time I ever went to a WrestleMania, The Undertaker lost his streak during that time period. I was with my daughter, who the reason that she got into wrestling was because of The Undertaker. And I would say The Undertaker for her and I was like Roddy Piper for me and my dad. So we loved The Undertaker. We would watch all his matches and talk about him and look up his old matches. And she was so upset when he lost his streak that she started crying, and she was crying so bad that we had to leave. So we left WrestleMania early because of the WWE deciding to break The Undertaker's streak. And boy, that was really disappointing. But man, this guy was so cool. He had many different iterations throughout the years. He would go on to be Deadman Inc. and the American Badass, but he always would come back to the Undertaker. He always kept that aura, which is something magical. And a gimmick like that shouldn't really work, or maybe it works for a couple years back in the 80s, but somehow he made it work. And I've heard it said many, many times that nobody else could have pulled off that gimmick, and especially pulled off that gimmick for as long as he did. And also changed the gimmick a couple times and then come back to being just The Undertaker. And just The Undertaker is such an understatement. He is my number one favorite wrestler of all time. I'm not sure how you turn a man who looks like a snake, acts like a snake, carries an actual snake into the ring, into a hero. But Jake the Snake was a villain, but he was also kind of a hero. Like, everybody loved to watch him. So he was a hero to some and a villain to many. Especially the people that loved reptiles, they loved Jake the Snake Roberts. He couldn't be a bad guy to them. He was a snake guy. But probably the most important thing about him was that he was wildly entertaining. He was a guy that you look forward to every week, seeing and hearing what he was going to say. He had that mysterious kind of heel thing going for him, where he was a cheap shot artist to a point, but the moves that he did would be something that a snake would do. Like, his promos were real dark and kind of quiet, not so much yelling and screaming into the microphone. It reminded you of a snake, slowly coiling in position to get ready to strike. Everything about his gimmick was perfect, and it was pulled off perfectly by Jake the Snake. And of course, at the end of his matches, when he would dump that snake out onto people, and they would roll around and freak out, and they would get scared, all the girls would scream. That was just such a spectacle. I'm sure they took good care of those snakes, and no snakes were injured, but it was one of my favorite things to see. It was reminiscent of a horror movie, just laying there unconscious. You just got beat up, and now this dude's dumping a 6-foot python on your face, and it's wriggling around all over you and slithering around, and you just got to lay there and take it. Yeah, that was a pretty cool gimmick. Talk about your mouthy heels. This guy could talk. He was actually right up there with Flair when it comes to the best mic skills in the 80s. He was such a good talker, he actually went on to become an announcer. Later, he became an actor and then governor. Yeah, go figure. He was an awesome wrestler, one of the best physiques of all time. He brought a lot of his training as a Navy SEAL into training for wrestling and bodybuilding, and you could see it. He could move. He did not get tired. He knew how to throw a punch. He knew how to protect his opponent when he was throwing those punches and kicks and slams. The guy was a consummate pro and probably the most arrogant man to ever live. His outfits were flamboyant. His finger was in your face, and he could back it up. And that's for sure. This guy could scrap. He went on to be in Predator, which is one of my favorite movies of all time, and he was awesome in it. Even though he wasn't in it as much as I would have hoped, he had the best gun in that whole movie as well. But just a wildly entertaining guy. He was flamboyant, he was cocky, and he wanted you to know that he thought he was better than you. Right down to his name, Jesse the Body Ventura. He was proud of himself, and he wanted you to know it. He later changed his name to Jesse the Brain, which was dumb, but just a consummate wrestler from the late 70s and early 80s, name that you would hear, and also a very, very familiar voice at the broadcasting booth. He was an announcer for some of the most pinnacle matches in wrestling history, and he had a great voice. And like I said, he could talk. He knew what he was doing in the ring. He knew what he was doing on the side of the ring, and he knew what he was doing in front of the camera. Classic. Shortly after my dad died, I went to live with my grandparents, and they knew how important wrestling was to me and that it was something that my dad and I shared and something we connected over. So they got me tickets to go see WWF live. I was totally stunned. I did not see that coming. It was amazing. I ended up getting a huge poster of Sergeant Slaughter in a tank and pointing out at you. He just looked so mean and so tough and just like someone that if he tells you to jump, you say how high, literally. He was just a big, mean guy, and he was very believable. I'm still not sure to this day if he actually was a Marine drill sergeant at one point or not, but he played the role very, very well. He had a heel turn, which I hated. I thought it was stupid, and I didn't think it made any sense, but I had a great time at the wrestling event. It was my first one, and even though I was in the midst of absolute despair, it still gave me an escape. And that's what wrestling is. It's an escape from reality. It's something that you can use to kind of forget about your troubles, and you just focus on all these larger-than-life characters and let the storylines take you away. I still remember some of the wrestlers that I saw there, some of the legends, obviously Sergeant Slaughter. I saw Junkyard Dog, Greg the Hammer Valentine, Wendy Richter, the Fabulous Moolah, Tito Santana, and a bunch of others. I can't remember anymore. But it was a great night, and I had that poster of Sergeant Slaughter up on my wall for years, and it reminded me of that night. And when I would feel sad, which was a lot, losing your father, that'll do that to you, but I would just look at that poster, and I would think of that night. I would think about what's going to happen on the wrestling plot lines that I watched every weekend on WCCW and WCW and WWF. And I think I watched NWA or AWA too back then. I can't remember. But I watched as much wrestling as I could. I consumed as much of it as I could find. And it was hard to find back then without the internet, without being able to look up on your phone what's going to be on when. You kind of had to find it and then remember it. And then it usually changed within a couple months. But wrestling has always been a good escape for me and a good connection, and has a very special place in my heart and always will. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Wrestling with Somewhat Legendary, right here at Fox's Pizza in Willow Street. We are honored to have the former WWE Intercontinental Champion, WWE Hall of Famer, former WWE President, WWE's greatest villain in wrestling history, who's accumulated over 34 championships in various organizations. He was in the first ever WrestleMania. He's a critically acclaimed actor, best-selling author, father, hero, villain, icon, legend, the rebel, the gunslinger, Roddy Piper. For all the fans, I just want to share a quick story with you.